So, you think you're tough?
Don't think. No.
The room was loud with laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of Hollywood egos filling the air. It was supposed to be just another private night where actors, producers, and fighters relaxed far away from cameras. But in the corner of the room sat a quiet man most people barely noticed. Small compared to the giants around him. Calm, watching everything. Then the doors opened and a massive 350-pound bodyguard stepped inside. The kind of man who looked like he could break a door off its hinges without trying. He scanned the room like he owned it. Moments later, his eyes locked onto the quiet man in the corner. Bruce Lee. What happened next would freeze the entire room. Witnessed by one of Hollywood's toughest icons, Clint Eastwood, the night turned. From casual conversation to a moment nobody present would ever forget. Because when the towering bodyguard decided to pick a fight, he believed he was about to humiliate a skinny martial artist. Instead, he stepped into one of the most shocking demonstrations of speed, control, and quiet confidence anyone had ever seen. The moment the giant walked in, the energy of the room shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. Conversations slowed, heads turned, and the usual Hollywood confidence suddenly felt smaller. The man who had just entered wasn't just big, he was enormous. At around 350 pounds, built like a moving wall of muscle and intimidation, he carried himself with the slow confidence of someone used to people stepping aside without being asked. His shoulders filled the doorway, his arms hung like heavy ropes beside him, and every step across the wooden floorboard sounded deliberate, almost like a warning. He was known around certain circles as a professional bodyguard, the type hired by powerful businessmen and celebrities who needed someone imposing enough to make problems disappear before they even started. The kind of man who had broken up fights in rough bars, thrown aggressive fans across sidewalks, and once reportedly lifted a fully grown man off the ground with one hand just to prove a point. People like that didn't enter rooms quietly. A few men at the nearby tables glanced at him and immediately looked away. The universal signal of recognizing someone you didn't want trouble with. Others whispered to each other, curious about what had brought such a massive figure into a relaxed Hollywood gathering. Near the center of the room, Clint Eastwood leaned slightly back in his chair, watching the entrance with calm curiosity. Eastwood had seen tough men before. He had worked with stunt fighters, boxers, rodeo riders, and men who made their living in dangerous professions. But even he raised an eyebrow at the size of the newcomer. The bodyguard paused for a moment, scanning the room with slow patience as if measuring everyone present. And then his attention stopped. Across the room, seated casually at a small table, with a drink in front of him, Bruce Lee sat quietly. He didn't look intimidating at first glance. Compared to the towering bodyguard, Bruce looked almost small, lean, relaxed. His posture wasn't defensive or proud. It was calm, like someone completely comfortable wherever he happened to be. But there was something else about him. Something in the way he sat, the way his eyes moved, alert without tension. The kind of awareness that experienced fighters recognized instantly. The bodyguard tilted his head slightly. To him, Bruce probably looked like an easy target. Just another martial arts instructor who had gained some popularity in Hollywood circles. Someone whose reputation, in the bodyguard's mind, might have been exaggerated by movies and stories. Men built like the giant who had just entered the room often believed size was the final argument in any confrontation. He began walking toward Bruce's table. The floor creaked under each step. Conversations nearby faded as people realized exactly where he was heading. Clint Eastwood noticed it too. His eyes shifted from the bodyguard to Bruce Lee and back again. Eastwood didn't interrupt, didn't move, just watched with the quiet interest of someone who sensed something unusual was about to unfold. The bodyguard stopped a few feet from Bruce's table. Bruce looked up slowly. No sudden movements. No defensive posture. Just a calm glance, the kind someone gives when a stranger approaches to speak. For a moment, neither man said anything. The difference in size was almost unbelievable. The bodyguard looked like he weighed twice as much, maybe more. His shadow practically swallowed the small table where Bruce sat. Finally, the giant spoke. His voice was deep, carrying across the nearby tables. "So you're Bruce Lee?" A few people, closer to the scene, leaned in slightly. Bruce nodded once. "That's right." The bodyguard smirked, folding his arms across his chest, making himself look even larger. "I've heard about you." Bruce didn't respond immediately. He simply watched the man with steady eyes. That silence alone seemed to irritate the bodyguard slightly. Some men expected instant reactions, especially when they were used to intimidating people. Instead, Bruce just waited. The giant leaned forward slightly, resting one heavy hand on the table. "They say you're the fastest fighter around." Bruce gave a small shrug. "Some people say that." The bodyguard chuckled, the sound low and dismissive. "You don't look like much." A few uncomfortable glances passed around the room. Clint Eastwood remained completely still, his attention fixed on the two men. Bruce's expression didn't change. "I get that a lot." The bodyguard straightened again and looked around the room as if making sure people were watching, and many of them were. Because moments like this had a strange gravity. People sensed tension the way animals sense storms. The giant cracked his knuckles slowly. "You know," he said, his voice louder now, "I've thrown around fighters bigger than you." Bruce's eyes remained calm. That might be true. The simple answer seemed to confuse the bodyguard for a second. He had expected resistance, maybe even anger. Instead, he got agreement, which somehow made the moment feel even stranger. The bodyguard leaned closer again. "So I'm curious," he said. "What happens if someone like me decides to test that speed everyone talks about?" A quiet ripple moved through the nearby crowd. Someone at the back whispered, "Is this really happening?" Clint Eastwood shifted slightly in his chair, his gaze narrowing just a bit. Bruce Lee slowly stood up from his seat. The difference in height became even more dramatic when they were both standing. The bodyguard looked like a mountain beside him, but Bruce didn't step back. He didn't raise his fists. He simply stood there, relaxed, his hands hanging naturally at his sides. "Why would you want to do that?" Bruce asked calmly. The bodyguard grinned. "Because I think it's all talk." Bruce tilted his head slightly, studying the man's face. "You might be right." Another strange answer. The giant frowned slightly. Then Bruce added quietly, "Or you might learn something." That line moved through the room like electricity. Clint Eastwood's lips twitched into the smallest hint of a smile. The bodyguard rolled his shoulders, clearly preparing to make some kind of move. He stepped back slightly to create space. The crowd instinctively widened the circle around them. Some people looked excited. Others looked worried. Because even if Bruce Lee had a reputation, the size difference looked dangerous. 350 pounds against a lean martial artist. The bodyguard lifted his hands, not quite a professional fighting stance, but the posture of a man confident he could overpower almost anyone. Bruce still hadn't raised his guard. His breathing looked slow, relaxed. The bodyguard shook his head in disbelief. "You're not even ready." Bruce looked directly into his eyes. "I'm ready." The giant suddenly lunged forward, one massive hand shooting out to grab Bruce by the collar, the kind of move that would have ended most confrontations instantly. What happened next moved so fast that several people in the room later swore they hadn't even seen Bruce move. The bodyguard's arm stopped mid-motion, not gently, not slowly, but with a sharp, snapping halt that looked almost impossible for something that large to stop so suddenly. Bruce's hand had intercepted the wrist, not grabbing, not wrestling, just touching at a precise angle. The giant's expression changed instantly, confusion first, then surprise, because the movement he had started with full strength simply refused to continue. Bruce's other hand moved once, a short motion, barely visible. The bodyguard's balance shifted unexpectedly as his weight leaned forward. His feet struggled to adjust for the first time since entering the room. The giant looked uncertain. The challenge turned the room silent in a way that felt almost unnatural. Just moments earlier, the place had been alive with casual conversations, glasses tapping together and laughter echoing off the walls. Now the air felt heavy, as if every person present had suddenly realized they were about to witness something unpredictable. People leaned forward in their chairs, some standing quietly along the walls, others slowly stepping back to create more space between the two men standing at the center of the room. The massive bodyguard stood there, his confidence still visible, but no longer as effortless as it had been when he first walked in. His arm, the same arm he had lunged forward with seconds earlier, still tingled from the strange interruption Bruce had made with that precise touch to his wrist. It hadn't hurt exactly, but something about the way the movement had been stopped, so quickly, so easily, made him uneasy. Bruce Lee remained calm. He didn't look like a man who had just confronted someone nearly twice his size. His breathing was steady, his shoulders relaxed, and his eyes sharp without being aggressive. He simply stood there, balanced on the balls of his feet as if gravity itself treated him differently. Around them, whispers floated through the crowd. "Did you see that? How did he stop him like that?" I didn't even see Bruce move. Clint Eastwood had shifted his position slightly, resting his elbow on the table as he watched. His expression carried quiet interest, the look of someone who had spent years observing people and knew when something unusual was unfolding. The bodyguard flexed his fingers, trying to shake off the odd sensation in his arm. "Fast," he muttered, half to himself. Bruce gave a small nod. "You moved first." That calm response only irritated the giant further. The bodyguard had built his reputation on intimidation and strength. People usually backed down when confronted by someone his size. But Bruce hadn't stepped away. He hadn't even flinched. Instead, he had interrupted the attack with almost casual precision. The bodyguard took another step back, widening the distance between them again. "This time," he said slowly, "I won't grab." Bruce tilted his head slightly. "All right." The giant rolled his shoulders and raised his hands properly now, forming a crude but powerful fighting stance. His fists looked like heavy stones, easily capable of knocking someone unconscious with a single clean hit. The difference between the two men looked almost absurd. Bruce was lean and compact, his muscles defined but not bulky. The bodyguard looked like he could lift Bruce with one arm and throw him across the room. But appearances had a way of lying. The bodyguard exhaled sharply and then moved. His right fist launched forward with serious force, a wide punch thrown with the full momentum of his upper body behind it. It wasn't the technique of a trained martial artist, but it carried the raw power of a man who had probably ended many fights with sheer strength. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the punch cut through the air. And Bruce was no longer there. He hadn't jumped away dramatically. He hadn't stumbled back. He had simply shifted. A tiny step to the side, barely noticeable, allowing the massive punch to pass harmlessly through empty air. The bodyguard's momentum pulled him slightly forward, forcing him to adjust his balance again. Bruce's hand tapped the giant's elbow lightly as the punch passed. The bodyguard stumbled one step before regaining his footing. Laughter did not erupt, but a few quiet murmurs of surprise spread through the crowd. The giant turned quickly, eyes narrowing. "You're running." Bruce shook his head. "No." The bodyguard stepped forward again, this time swinging a heavy backhand with his left arm, trying to catch Bruce before he could slip away again. Bruce moved once more, a half step, a slight turn of his torso. The strike sliced through air again, but this time Bruce's hand moved faster. 2 quick taps landed against the bodyguard's chest. Not punches, just controlled touches, the kind that made a point. The bodyguard froze for a split second. He looked down at his chest as if trying to understand what had just happened. Bruce lowered his hands again. "If I hit you there," Bruce said calmly, "you'd have trouble breathing." The bodyguard's jaw tightened. People around the room shifted uncomfortably. This was no longer just a playful challenge. The giant rushed forward again, frustration beginning to replace confidence. This time he grabbed with both arms, trying to trap Bruce in a bear hug that would end the encounter instantly. For a moment it looked like he might succeed. his arms wrapped around Bruce's shoulders. The crowd inhaled sharply, but Bruce's body suddenly dropped lower, slipping through the closing grip like water sliding through fingers. His right foot pivoted, his left hand pressed lightly against the bodyguard's forearm. His hips rotated. The bodyguard's balance broke again, not violently, just enough. The giant staggered 2 steps past Bruce before catching himself. A quiet wave of disbelief moved through the audience. Someone whispered, "He's playing with him." Clint Eastwood leaned back slightly, the corner of his. The 3 seconds that followed felt longer than anything anyone in the room had ever experienced. The massive bodyguard stood there, breathing heavier now. The earlier confidence that came with his size replaced by a cautious awareness he hadn't walked into the room with. Moments ago, he had believed he could overpower Bruce Lee simply by closing the distance and using brute force. Now he understood that every movement he made was being studied, predicted, and quietly dismantled before it even had a chance to land. The room had gone so quiet that even the smallest sound seemed loud. Someone shifting in a chair, the faint creak of wood under a step, the slow rhythm of breathing from the 2 men facing each other. Bruce Lee remained relaxed. His shoulders were loose, his hands lowered slightly, his stance balanced in a way that looked effortless. He wasn't bouncing or showing dramatic martial arts poses. Instead, he looked almost casual, like a man waiting patiently rather than preparing for a fight. The bodyguard studied him carefully. He had learned something in the past few moments. Charging blindly didn't work. Swinging with raw strength didn't work. Every time he attacked, Bruce seemed to disappear or redirect the movement as if he had already seen it coming. But pride was still a powerful thing, and the giant wasn't ready to walk away yet. He shifted his weight slowly, testing his footing, then rolled his shoulders once more. His eyes stayed locked on Bruce, trying to read something, any clue that might tell him how to land a strike. Bruce's expression didn't change. Around the room, the audience leaned closer. Some people held their breath without realizing it. Clint Eastwood sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the 2 figures in the center of the open space. He had seen staged fights in movies, carefully choreographed action scenes designed to look convincing on camera. But this was something completely different. This wasn't choreography, this was instinct. The bodyguard moved first again, but this time he didn't rush forward wildly. Instead, he stepped slowly to the side, circling Bruce the way fighters sometimes do when searching for an opening. Bruce turned with him smoothly, maintaining the same calm distance. Step. Turn. Step. Turn. The giant suddenly feinted a jab with his left hand. Bruce didn't react. The bodyguard's eyes narrowed. He threw the real punch with his right. It came fast, faster than his earlier swings, aimed directly toward Bruce's jaw, and once again the punch missed. Bruce leaned slightly, back, just enough for the fist to pass by his face. The movement looked almost lazy. The bodyguard tried to follow immediately with another strike, but Bruce's hand snapped out and tapped his wrist sharply. Not hard, just precise. The giant's second punch collapsed before it fully formed. Frustration flashed across his face. "You keep touching my arms," he muttered. Bruce nodded slightly. "They're the things trying to hit me." A few people at the edges of the room exchanged glances, amazed at how calm Bruce remained. The bodyguard exhaled sharply and stepped forward again, closing the distance more aggressively this time. Bruce didn't retreat. That alone surprised several people watching. Instead, Bruce shifted his weight forward slightly. The bodyguard swung again. Bruce moved inside the strike, a short step, a small pivot. His hand struck once, a quick snapping motion against the giant's chest, then again, another rapid strike against the shoulder, 2 fast impacts that landed before the bodyguard could even adjust his balance. The giant blinked in confusion. He hadn't seen the strikes clearly, only felt them. Bruce had already stepped back again. The bodyguard shook his head slowly. "You're fast," said. Bruce gave a small shrug. "You're strong." The giant frowned. "That doesn't seem to matter." Bruce tilted his head slightly. "It matters if you can use it." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. The bodyguard suddenly lunged again, attempting another grab. This time Bruce didn't slip away immediately. Instead, he allowed the giant to come close. The bodyguard's arms reached forward, trying to wrap around Bruce's upper body. For a split second, it looked like he might succeed. But Bruce's body shifted downward. His left hand pressed lightly against the bodyguard's elbow. His right hand touched the wrist. His hips rotated. The motion was small, but incredibly precise. The giant's arm slid past Bruce's shoulders as his own momentum carried him forward. Bruce stepped slightly behind him, one quick push at the back of the shoulder. The bodyguard stumbled forward again, not falling, but losing control of his balance for the third